So after the tumultuous ending of the war arc, in which Askeladd killed King Sven, and subsequently Canute killed Askeladd, and Thorfinn went into a rage fit and attacked Prince Canute, gashed a scar right below his eye, we were left to wonder what was to happen next of Thorfinn and the various members of Vinland Saga. And in this video, we're going to be covering the preceding arc known as the slave/farm arc. And with that said, let's get right into it, guys. So we start with a slave named Einar. We see that various slaves are getting transported for sale. Einar subsequently gets sold to a man named Keitel. Einar quickly finds out that if he can create enough wheat in the field by cutting down a forest, he can subsequently sell the wheat to cover the costs of his owner Keitel that he incurred by buying him, thus allowing him to earn his freedom. It is at this moment that Einar meets a young Icelandic boy who is working as a slave himself, that being Thorfinn. Now, while Einar is pleased with his purported disposition, Thorfinn looks rather ambivalent, and shortly after Einar and Thorfinn receive scraps for lunch, Einar quickly learns that things are not as they seem. Keitel, the farm owner, and owner of Thorfinn, Einar, and many other slaves, is attempting to teach his youngest son the family trade by manning the fields himself. Olmar, the youngest son, has other ambitions, however, namely becoming a soldier for Canute's army and abandoning the wheat farm trade. While sulking, a couple of Keitel's warriors, otherwise known as guests, inform him that the only way he can become a man is by taking the life of another. The next day, the warriors gather Thorfinn and Einar for slaughter by the hand of the young son of the farm, but he does not have the fortitude to take another man's life. So Fox, one of the guests, threatens Thorfinn, but it is to no avail. And just as Thorfinn is wondering why he continues living, Snake comes in and verbally and physically punishes Badger and Fox, i.e. the two guests. Afterwards, Snake tests Thorfinn's abilities and is quite impressed with the young man's agility and speed. Thorfinn, likewise, compares Snake's abilities to Askeladd's. After healing up, Thorfinn reveals that he has fought in war and killed countless men. Einar, who suffered dearly from the devastations of war, begins to resent Thorfinn, but quickly dissolves his hate and becomes Thorfinn's first friend. At this point, we transition back over to Canute, who turned out to become a badass. I mean, just look at the differences. Just as a reminder, this was the pussy who everyone thought was a girl, and now he's turned into this. Canute claims to be the King of England, but King Ethelred, the previous King of England, begs to differ. Therefore, Canute takes certain measures to gain an ally in Murica, Earl Edric, via persuading him that it is in his best interest to serve Canute. After an alliance is struck, Ethelred died shortly after, due to a quote-unquote disease, as did his son Edmund, whose reign only lasted 7 months. With his rivals to the throne out of the way, Canute was declared King of England in 1018, 4 years after his father's death. Einar and Thorfinn, in the meantime, continue to clear the fields, so that they can begin planting their wheat. Unfortunately, removing the tree roots proves exceptionally difficult. Thus, Einar and Thorfinn request a horse to aid in their work. After being denied by the other farmhands, an old, mysterious man offers his horse to the two, provided they do some chores. After completing a myriad of back-breaking chores, the old man lends his horse to Thorfinn and Einar, which makes clearing the field infinitely easier. We also find out that the old man is none other than Keitel's father, Sverkell, and during a conversation at Sverkell's house, the old man bemoans his son's efforts of increasing his wealth, as he believes the pursuit of wealth is empty and only leads to more problems. And just as an aside, this is a nice bit of foreshadowing for the future. This sentiment, however, is not lost on Thorfinn. As Thorfinn and Einar begin to see progress in their wheat field, Thorgill, Keitel's oldest son, returns from the battlefield. But before the family can celebrate, Keitel's warriors, i.e. guests, have captured a couple of children who are suspected of stealing food from the farm. It turns out the children, Sture and Thora, have an ill mother, and a father that hasn't returned home in 1 year. While a punishment for the theft is warranted, Keitel doesn't want to take drastic measures, and agrees to have the children work off the debt. But the warriors want to set an example for future thieves, that their actions won't go without proper punishment. And, thusly, Stuart receives a thorough beating. Afterwards, we find out that Keitel, much like his younger son, is quite averse to bloodshed and physical punishments, and might even be considered a coward in juxtaposition to his own son, Thorgill. Thorfinn then reveals to Einar that a man named Askeladd killed his father, and while he recklessly pursued vengeance in his adolescence, he no longer harbors hatred for the dead Viking mercenary. However, he also feels empty and without purpose. Sverkell imbues Thorfinn with the knowledge that emptiness is quite alright, and is ideal for being reborn. Afterwards, Thorfinn and Einar return to their wheat field, which was vandalized in their absence. Enraged, Einar wishes to seek vengeance on the farmhands whom he believes wrecked their field. Thorfinn urges Einar to act responsibly, but all logic goes out the window when Einar stumbles into the farmhands. And after a rude remark by the farmhands, Einar clenches his fist and begins to throw a strike. But before it lands, Thorfinn swiftly knocks down the farmhand and breaks his jaw in the process. All hell breaks loose from here, and while Einar is holding his own, Thorfinn gets knocked out and begins to dream of his father, Thor's. The dream, however, quickly turns into a nightmare, with Thorfinn descending into a virtual hellhole, in which countless dead soldiers are fighting ceaselessly. And while Thorfinn hangs on a cliff with his fingertips, he's made aware of a presence he has not seen in a long time: Askeladd. Askeladd proceeds to tell him that he is not in Valhalla or Hell, but the real world itself, and that the fighting warriors are all the men he has killed. Askeladd then proceeds to tell Thorfinn that he is lucky, because he has escaped the brutalities of war, and he has the chance of becoming a true warrior. Thorfinn then wakes up and finds out that Einar and him won the fight with the farmhands. While walking, Thorfinn tells Einar that he does not wish to harm anyone else for as long as he lives, which is a drastic philosophical change from Thorfinn's previous attitude, which was to kill everyone and anyone in sight. He has thusly changed his ways from being a brutal warrior at heart to a solemn pacifist. We then transition back to Canute as he arrives in Denmark. As it turns out, his brother, King Harald, is gravely ill, and thanks to an illusion of King Sven's decapitated head, we find out that Canute had Harald poisoned, so that he could rule Denmark and England by himself. But heavy is the head that wears the crown, as Sven warns Canute that the curse of the crown will eventually ruin him. In the meantime, 3.5 years has passed, meaning Thorfinn and Einar have nearly earned their freedom. Just as Thorfinn and Einar are visiting Sverkell's home, Snake begins to panic and wonder where the old man is. Turns out, he passed out in a field once again, except this time was much more serious. Arnhind, a servant/maid, is instructed to stay with Sverkell until he recovers, which pleases Einar greatly, considering he has a bit of a crush on her. In the meantime, Kajalakar's place, a farm near Keitel's farm, had an incident in which a slave slaughtered the family and set the house ablaze, and now he is roaming the countryside. Snake, thusly, issues orders to increase the number of men on guard, just in case the escaped slave visits Keitel's farm. Back over to Canute, he is training himself to be a hardened warrior by having a sword fight with Wolf in the courtyard. The encounter shocks Canute's sister, Estrid, who remembers her brother as a meek individual who could barely touch a sword in his youth. After Canute's surprising victory, one of his advisors informs him that maintaining an active military in England is too financially straining and requires additional revenue to do so. Among the recommendations to generate more revenue, Canute chooses to add to the royal farmland via appropriating from various Danish farm owners. One name that is mentioned is Keitel's farm. During Keitel's trip to pay King Harald tribute, he discovers that Harald is dead, and Canute is the acting king. Keitel then decides to curry favor with the new king, but not before running into Leif Erikson in town. During their discussion, Erikson and Keitel talk about Thorfinn, and Leif wonders if it is the same Thorfinn, son of Thor's. Afterwards, Keitel is granted an audience with King Canute, and to his pleasure, King Canute has accepted his tribute, and will maintain the agreement that his brother and his father had with Keitel Farm. Unfortunately, during the conversation, Olmar decides he wants to ask Canute to join the royal army, and when given the chance to display his sword skills, he cannot even cut through a dead pig. Wolf, obviously, does not want the boy Olmar in their ranks, but Canute, ever the opportunist, wants to use the boy for other purposes. The next day, Olmar is provoked by Canute's messengers, and subsequently finds himself in a battle that seems to be rigged in his favor. Of course, he doesn't know that, and ends up killing one of the soldiers. Thorgill then decides to step in and massacre every last soldier in sight. This leads Canute's soldiers to attempt to bring in the Keitel farm in for treason, but Thorgill will not allow it. Afterwards, through some questioning, Thorgill finds out that the entire incident with Olmar was a setup to charge the family with treason and seize their land for the royal farm. The family then escapes via Leif Erikson's boat, and Canute, thusly, mobilizes his men along with the Jam Vikings to seize the valuable treasure of a farm. At the farm, Sverkell is not doing so well, but as Snake reads him the Bible, we find out that Thorfinn is listening in, and quite enjoys the stories himself. Just then, the runaway slave comes stampeding through Keitel's farm, and after Arnhind calls out to the man, we find out his name is Gardar, and that Arnhind is his wife. Snake steps in and battles the monstrous Gardar, and with his swift moves, takes down the hulking giant. In the aftermath of the battle, Einar argues with Snake about freeing Gardar, but it is to no avail. Einar then proposes that Thorfinn and himself should free Gardar from bondage, so that Arnhind and him can finally be free. Arnhind refuses and decides to tell everyone her somber past in which her husband Gardar left the land to fight a battle, and while gone, Vikings stole her son and she was sold into slavery. Arnhind decides that the past is in the past and wishes to concentrate on her future with her new baby, the father being Keitel, the farm owner himself. That being said, she still wishes to clean Gardar's wounds. After being denied by Snake at first, one of the guards allows her to do so, and Gardar takes the opportunity to bite the neck off of one of the guards, and scream furiously at Arnhind to cut him free. The two slaves escape. Snake is furious and organizes a search party to find the runaway slaves. The next morning, Einar and Thorfinn have a philosophical discussion of sorts, in which Thorfinn believes that war leads to slavery. He also shares the cursed dreams that he is having about all the men he's killed over the years. This is a pivotal moment in the manga, because Thorfinn emphasizes the thin line between warmongerer and slave. Also, indirectly, he highlights how being a warrior offered him no further advantages than the common slave, because during his days as a warrior, he was a slave to his emotions, i.e. anger and rage, while now he is a slave to his nightmares and past transgressions. Afterwards, Einar and Thorfinn find out that Gardar escaped with Arnhind, and in his haste, Einar pursues the runaway slaves. Eventually, they see Arnhind coming out of a house, and decide to have a conversation with her. Thorfinn quickly realizes, though, that they are being watched by the guest inside the house, so they keep their conversation to a whisper. Einar urges Arnhind to continue running away with Gardar, but Arnhind is pregnant and Gardar is severely injured. Just then, a cloaked figure, who turns out to be Einar, approaches the village and gives Snake's men a false sense of hope that it is Gardar. This window of opportunity gives Thorfinn and Arnhind the time to grab Gardar, who was hiding under Sverkell's bed, to escape from the village. Snake, however, realizes the cloaked man, Einar, doesn't appear to be injured, which would mean it is a decoy to distract them from the real Gardar. Snake then goes back to the village where he tells Thorfinn to stand down or be killed. Before the battle starts, however, Thorfinn has an illusory conversation with Askeladd, in which the Viking mercenary queries whether or not he is making the right choice for a true warrior. A choice that he has no time to ponder, as he needs to act quickly to save Gardar's life. And with a swift set of moves, Thorfinn's warrior spirit emerges once more to fight Snake. After some epic exchanges, Snake ends up near the cart with Gardar in it. Despite pleas from Arnhind and Sverkell to spare Gardar's life, Snake pierces his sword through Gardar's chest. Thorfinn, as a result, looks ready for vengeance, but not before Gardar leaps up and begins strangling Snake into unconsciousness. Gardar and Arnhind then leave with Sverkell's cart, and what turns out to be the man's last moments of life. And boy, were these an emotional set of manga panels. I myself am a father, and hearing Gardar talk about his lost son with so much hope and jubilation, even though his son was lost to the Viking mercenaries, was absolutely heart-wrenching. But at the same time, quite beautiful in a weird way, because at the very least, Gardar died a happy, free man in his wife's arms, with the notion that all was well. In the meantime, Canute is 2 to 3 days from Keitel's farm, with Keitel and his sons just arriving and preparing for war. While tied up next to Einar, Thorfinn wonders if there was a better way of handling the situation with Snake, and wants to use violence as a last resort in the future. After finding out that Arnhind ran away from the farm, Keitel severely beats the woman to near death, claiming that she is his property. Leif, under Patter's recommendation, offers to buy Arnhind from Keitel so that she can leave the farm with Thorfinn and Einar. Yet, Keitel refuses, and thusly prepares for war with the King of Denmark and England. As Keitel rallies the various farmers in the area to confront the royal army, Leif urges Thorfinn to leave the farm. Yet Thorfinn refuses to leave without Arnhind, who is in critical condition after being beaten. Leif decides to wait one more day, but the royal ships are already in the distance and fastly approaching the farmland. After reaching the shore, Canute gives Keitel an ultimatum to leave the farmland and never return, or to face the full extent of Canute's might and die. Keitel, unwavered, decides to remain steadfast in his plans for battle, as does Snake and the other guest. As the battle commences, Thorfinn, Einar, Arnhind, and Leif are ready to leave, but Thorfinn is having doubts about leaving the farm without thanking his old master. In the meantime, the Jam Vikings are making short work of the warrior farmers, but Thorgill is using the distraction to swim behind Canute's ships to capture the unsuspecting king. The blood-soaked battle continues, with the Jam Vikings pummeling down every last farmer in sight. And as the farmers begin to flee, one of the Jam Vikings strikes down the cowardice farmer Keitel. Wolf decides to confirm Keitel's death, and with this small window, Thorgill levies a sneak attack against the unsuspecting king. Canute, however, deflects the attack at the last moment, spraining his wrist in the process, due to Thorgill's immense strength. The next attack from Thorgill is on its way, but Canute removes his cloak to serve as a distraction. Thorgill regathers himself after the distraction and readies for the final blow. Wolf tackles Thorgill at the last moment, however, but suffers a lost eye in the process, and allows Thorgill to escape by the skin of his teeth. Despite nearly losing his life and his top advisor, Canute wishes Thorgill to rejoin his ranks at some point in the future. Afterwards, Arnhind thanks Thorfinn and Einar for watching over her for the past few years, and subsequently dies. In the wake of Arnhind's death, Einar loses control and decides he wants to murder a wounded Keitel. But Thorfinn urges him not to descend down the path of vengeance that he fell down years prior, and was trapped for most of his adolescence. After burying Arnhind, the two non-blood brothers decide to make it their life's mission of going to Vinland, to set up a society that is devoid of war and slavery. In wake of the battle, Canute displays faux regret about how the situation was handled at Keitel's farm. But the illusion of King Sven's head sees past this facade, and reveals the consequences of Canute's actions. This culminates in a scene that is eerily reminiscent of the eclipse in Berserk, where Canute stares at a bridge of dead corpses that lead to his purported paradise. At the farm, Olmar, the newly appointed leader, must choose between using his remaining 20 men to fight Canute or surrender to the king for a life of exile. The timid Olmar does not wish to fight any longer, and thusly chooses to surrender, despite Thorgill's enthusiasm to fight on. Before leaving the farm, Thorfinn decides he wants to broker a deal of peace with King Canute. Despite Einar's pleas to abandon his wishful thinking, the Vikings whom Thorfinn talks to do not take kindly to Thorfinn's request, and give him a deal that if he can withstand 100 punches, that they will grant him an audience with King Canute. Even though Thorfinn is rolling with the punches to minimize the damage, they are taking their toll. And after the 100th blow is dealt, and Thorfinn is battered and bruised, he earns the respect of the various Vikings, including Wolf, who grants Thorfinn his request. Thorfinn, henceforth, implores Canute to leave the farm alone, as 100 dead farmers surely makes up for 10 dead soldiers. Canute, however, does not yield. Einar then speaks his mind in front of the king, accusing him of being a robber. Canute does not repudiate this claim. In fact, he proclaims, "I am the Emperor, the strongest Viking in the North Sea." Canute then speaks of opposing God and protecting the powerful Vikings. He thusly ends his diatribe by inviting Thorfinn to kill him if he wishes to stop him from taking the farm. King Sven's head reminds Canute that he is a shepherd among sheep, and he mustn't attempt to be understood or accepted by the lower rungs of society. Afterwards, Thorfinn tells Canute he has no other choice but to run, and even acknowledges that he is unsure of the morality of Canute's decisions. This certainly draws parallels to the often quoted phrase, "You need to break a few eggs to make an omelet." Although the reader may be dissuaded by Canute's callous nature, it must be understood that the life of a ruler is not an easy one, and if Canute does not take the necessary precautions to bolster his forces, another country could easily come in and commit atrocities that far exceed these small sacrifices. Friedrich Nietzsche, 19th century philosopher, once wrote, "I do not wish to be mixed up and confused with preachers of equality. Men are not equal, nor shall they become equal." You may be asking yourself, what does this mean, and how does it apply to Vinland Saga? Well, we must recognize that everyone is born with a different set of skills, intelligence, and courage, and people who cultivate those talents should not be expected to adhere to the same standards as people of mediocre ability. For example, Gordon Ramsay, a world-class chef, should not be expected to flip burgers at McDonald's because of some egalitarian fantasy. Neither should a physicist at the Large Hadron Collider be expected to teach 4th grade science. Granted, we should treat people with respect, courtesy, and dignity, but to expect the natural hierarchy of success and power to break down is not only anti-human, but it is also anti-mammalian. To emphasize this point, think of wolves. Would you rather have the weakest, slowest wolf lead the hunt for food because it is fair, or the strongest wolf with the most keen instincts? The same applies to human society. If a weak, uninspired king is set to rule, he may put his entire country in danger to a much stronger adversary. Thorfinn has come to the understanding that blame and vengeance will not yield happiness. Quite the opposite, actually. And the only way to achieve true bliss is to disregard the morality of others, especially the herd, and seek a new value system that comes from one's own passions. This is what Thorfinn hopes to achieve by forging a new society of peace in Vinland. Einar, on the other hand, is full of resentment, a condition in which a weak individual reacts recklessly to every spoken word or action that reminds them of their own mediocrity. Therefore, they adhere to a morality of right versus wrong, to cover up their own weaknesses and envy of those in control, to give them an artificial feeling of superiority. Hence, Einar insists that Canute is a robber, i.e. a bad person, and mockingly recommends that Canute should work the fields himself, insinuating that Einar's work is just and righteous. This, tacitly, elucidates Einar's underlying belief in justice and the will to equality. But underneath this veil, as recognized by his facial expressions and expressive physical gestures, is a desire to enact vengeance. But Canute's actions cannot and should not be judged on the basis of right or wrong. These are merely constructs of people less capable of establishing a life for themselves. For one to avoid this negation of life, one must accept one's disposition and not focus on regrets, i.e. would've, should've, could've's. Higher men, like Thorfinn and Canute, create their own set of morals to live by, morals that accelerate their ability to accomplish their own goals. Before Thorfinn had a goal, he too was a slave to his emotions and feelings of resentment. But now that he has laser focused on his goal of sailing to Vinland and creating a new society for himself and others, he has no time to worry about Canute's plans, let alone judge them for himself. To conclude this philosophical deviation, Thorfinn is the closest of achieving a self-actualized life to becoming a higher man, whereas Einar is rooted in a mindset of the herd and his base emotions. Canute, while being a man with a vision like Thorfinn, is inhibited by his own fear, as noted by his persistent visions of his dead father, most likely his inner consciousness that cannot accept his own decisions. Einar, henceforth, will need to relinquish his hatred and lay the foundations for his goals, whether that be going to Vinland or otherwise. And Canute will need to embrace his actions wholeheartedly, or start at the drawing board once again, and formulate a new set of ideals in which he has no regrets, and he pursues his goals without equivocation. Anywho, the arc ends with Canute and Thorfinn going their separate ways, and preparing to affirm their visions onto the world. But first, Thorfinn prepares to go see his mother and his sister in Iceland, both of which he hasn't seen in 18 years. And with that, we end the slave/farm arc of Vinland Saga. Quite the contrast from the first arc, but wow, what a ride. And if you want me to continue this video series on recapping the major events in the next manga arc of Vinland Saga, just give me a thumbs up and affirm your decision with a yes. But with that said though, thanks for watching guys, and catch you on the flip side.